You are listening to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. How is everybody doing? Happy to have you with us, whether it's joining live or if you're listening to us after the fact on one of your favorite audio platforms. We are grateful to have you tuning in. I am Anthony Cosenza, joined by John Sheeran. And John, another week and another big special guest on this program. Seems like every week we've got a high-profile guest, and I'm going to let you introduce our special guest because you were integral in creating this interview opportunity for us.
Absolutely. We're keeping the streak alive this week. We were fortunate enough to bring on, if anybody can see us while watching this live, fortunate enough to bring on the best dressed member of the Bengals beat. He just came. This was his first year on the Bengals beat. The ESPN Bengals reporter, Ben. Baby Ben, how are you doing tonight, man? How's quarantine been treating you?
Say it again.
How's quarantine been treating you, man? I think that's what we all need to start with.
It's been normal. I mean, sports writers, we don't go into the office anyways. And so, even when I worked at newspapers, like we all had desks, but nobody was ever there because everybody worked from home. So this is old hat for a lot of us. It's kind of weird that everybody's now doing what we do. So now we're seeing people like you used to be able to like go to the store in the middle of the day and just run your errands in the middle of the day and nobody was there. Now it's packed everywhere you go. So I'm kind of adjusting that way, but all things considered, very fortunate to be in the position we're in now.
Yeah, I mean, like we're the kings of working from home, and everyone's kind of adjusting to that now, and everyone's trying to get on their level, I guess. But a part of that, at least today, Zach Taylor had a Zoom press conference for, I believe, the first time, and I believe you were a part of it as well. How was that? What were your main takeaways from that? And do you think that that's like something that they can just do from now on? It seems a lot easier than just all packing into one room.
Yeah, I like being in the room though because you get to have kind of read people's facial reactions a little bit more. I think you can have a better chance with some follow-ups here and there. It's not as clunky. I thought today it actually worked really well, and more often than not too. Especially it was interesting. I did a little bit of Cowboys, like a vague amount of Cowboys back when I was at the morning news. I was like the seventh man on the depth chart there. Like when they needed somebody after college football season, I came in. And what was fascinating is Jason Garrett said absolutely nothing when he was on the podium. Like that was his main goal. Like I remember one of the beat writers said, if you quoted Jason Garrett in your story, something went terribly wrong. But what was fascinating is as soon as Garrett got off the podium, he would walk outside the room and then everybody would ask him questions off the record. And sometimes Zach will do that as well. We're able to get him in a walk-off. And so, while I like the ability to see him on Zoom, I think that, preferably we'd like to be in person.
So I want to follow up with that a little bit. As we all know, because of this situation, the draft has now moved virtually. And to my chagrin, because I was actually going to go to it this year. I live in Southern California, and I was going to go to Vegas, so I was stoked on it. And then, of course, this happens. But the draft has moved virtually. I want to kind of ask a little bit of a two-pronged question and get your opinion on it. What do you think the concern level is of the Bengals conducting a draft that way, especially when they have such high picks in this year's class? And do you think that this may be, I hate to sound like an ageist maybe, but do you think that this younger staff led by Zach Taylor, they almost have a little bit of an advantage using kind of this technology as opposed to maybe the Marvin Lewis old school approach that the previous regime held?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I wasn't here for Marvin, so it's hard for me to speak on what his regime was like and how he operated. But, really, I can't see it being too difficult. I mean, my entire church is full of old people, and we all meet on Zoom all the time. So and it seems like we all – and if they can figure it out, I think we should be – I think an NFL organization should be fine. It's funny. Yesterday we did the test run among the Bengal beat corps to see if we can figure it out. And we had some issues a little here and there. And then today, it was like we've been doing it for months. So I really don't think it's that difficult. Talking to Zach today, I didn't hear any major concerns. He sounded pretty comfortable with it. So I think it'll be a non-issue when it rolls around on April 23rd.
It just kind of seems like the NFL and I guess general managers in general are kind of looking for excuses in order to have this be a one and done, because if this works, it kind of makes a lot of what they do regularly at the draft and all of the stuff that goes on before, and it not unnecessary, but definitely not like a requirement before the draft. It's almost like They're just looking for ways to like say this is just not going to work. When in reality, this is what like businesses are just doing all the time, or at least nowadays. Like they have to adjust like everybody else.
Yeah, and I think this will end up being a one-off though, because you have to remember the NFL draft is a production. I mean, there's a lot of ESPN does a lot for this, and the NFL in turn also has kind of leaned into that as well. We've seen over the years kind of how it's grown just from like when you watch the old 30 for 30s or you go look at old draft film, it looks radically different than it does now in terms of the production, and that's by design. I think they've turned it into a major event, and I think I'm interested to see what the broadcast looks like, but having everybody in person, having people come across, hold the jersey, having the commissioner booed, like all of those things, having the fan atmosphere. Like I've covered it in Dallas at AT&T. Well, it's Arlington at AT&T Stadium. I don't think that can be replicated, and I think that the NFL does like that. The ability to kind of have that fan engagement. So I think that while yes, it is feasibly probably a better scenario to do what we're going to end up doing, everybody just do it over, virtual whatever. I think you're still going to have it be done the old ways afterwards for, because it's a big moneymaker.
Talking with Ben Baby of ESPN, one of the go-to sources of information for Cincinnati Bengals fans. Happy to have him with us. Ben, continuing on the draft talk, I hate to bring it up because it's like an ad nauseum topic. It seems like we get asked, and I mean, I understand that people want to know, but it's just throwing it out there. You've got a good pulse on the team. You work closely with them. Likelihood of the team trading out of the number one spot, not selecting who seems to be all but Joe Burrow with that pick.
Yeah, I can't say 0%, but I want to go as far right to the decimal point with a bunch of zeros and then put a 1 in there, because you never know what could happen. I mean, crazier things have occurred, but I would be just absolutely stunned. And it's not just from a football standpoint, and I think the Bengals really like what Burrow does on the field. But when you basically had your whole fan base for like 6-7 months, basically saying this is the guy we want, how are you going to sell anybody but him? Not only is that a tough situation for you as a franchise, but then whoever you do get as the number one pick or in your first round pick, I mean, you've almost set that guy up for failure because the whole expectation is, well, he's not this guy that we wanted. I mean, you go look at the attendance number and how bad it was last year. And I think there's a strong argument to be made that even if Joe Burrow doesn't pan out or you don't really think he's the top prospect or whatever, I don't think you can get anybody else, because I think what he does to the franchise's bottom line right now is really massive, and especially when you talk about the lease being up for renewal in a few years. I think there's a lot of things that go into this conversation. In more, the most important thing has to be how is he going to affect what they do on the field. And from everything that we've seen, when you talk to the coaching staff, they're all very confident that he'll be able to replicate what he did at LSU to the next level. I know that there's the big question about his arm strength. And, as I was thinking about it as we kind of talked about it at the combine with Zach and Brian Callahan, I think Joe Burrow's lack of arm strength has actually been one of his best blessings, because he's had to learn all the intricacies of how to play quarterback properly, how to learn the position the right way, because the thing is he can't overcome tight windows with arm strength, with velocity. He can't just say, oh, I need to squeeze it in there. So he's got to anticipate really well. He's got to be good with his timing. He's got to make all the reads, because he doesn't have the arm strength to compensate for all those things that maybe other guys such as Josh Allen or whatever, guys who have been blessed with a great arm, they're having to go do it the other way. They said, I've had this great arm, but now I've got to really learn how to understand coverages and defenses at a high level. So I think Burrow's been able, that's been the knock his entire career, even coming out of Athens. And he's been able to overcome that at Ohio State, LSU, and now people think that he may be able to do that in Cincinnati.
Zach Taylor has been really consistent when people are asking about Andy Dalton, keeping all options on the table. And maybe some of that's coach speak, maybe it's some of that's part of the truth. Based on what you've been hearing and what you've been asking as well, what is the most likely outcome of Andy Dalton's future in Cincinnati?
I would imagine that Andy Dalton gets cut. I think that's probably the most likely scenario, based on the math alone. I mean, when you saw how much money they spent, and let's be very clear, they spent that much money. Like when we look at what the Bengals did in free agency, they did all that they did all that at the front end of the deal. It's not like they spent this money and they go, oh, well, now what do we got to do? We got to cut Dre, we got to cut Andy, we got to cut BW Webb. Like all of these things have been in the works for a long time. And so if they spent that money and there's not enough money for Andy, that's by design. So now you go look at the contract and you go, okay, he's due $17.7 million on the cap. there is no way when you look at the Bengals' internal, budgets, and I know that that's been up for discussion, but that's how the front office views it. When you go look at the numbers that they have, when you look at money for restricted free agents, for injuries, for all these certain things that you need to basically field a team, whether that's conservative or not, that's the budget that they're working with, and there's no possible way that Andy Dalton's contract, as it currently stands, makes financial sense. It just doesn't. Because right now they're kind of, I think, in the red, and that's even before Reeder's contract hits the books, because that was just signed a couple of days ago. So now the question is, okay, well, what's the market for Andy Dalton? If there isn't a major market for him, does Andy say, okay, I'm willing to come back here as a backup moving forward and then take whatever money I'm going to get? Because then you've got to say, okay, if nobody wants me as a starter, is it better to be here as a backup? Maybe he ends up in a Ryan Tannehill situation where he goes somewhere else, the QB1 gets hurt, and then Andy comes in and then earns a starting job that way. But I think unless that the Bengals can find a trade partner, and I think most teams in the NFL know, especially with the influx of quarterbacks this year in free agency, that I don't know if we've ever seen so many veteran quarterbacks who have starting experience available. Right now it just wasn't in the Bengals' interest. It was tough for the Bengals to find a market to trade him, and everyone knowing what the cap situation is for them, I think they know that if you really want Andy, you might as well wait and kind of see what happens.
Yeah, and you got to figure for the Bengals, locker room dynamics all play into that, whether, keeping or cutting him loose. Talking with Ben Baby of ESPN, we're going to spend a few more minutes with him if he will indulge us.
Yeah, of course. I got nothing going on.
Well, you did have a lot going on over these past few weeks because of the Bengals free agency. You joked before we took the air that you thought it might be a little bit of a mellow time for you, and the Bengals made all of these moves. We'll get back to a little bit more draft stuff in just a second, but I want to focus in on free agency here. The Bengals made a lot of moves, probably the most active free agency period in their history of a team, if not one of. I want to get your take on what you think was the most impactful free agency move, whether it's by subtraction or by true addition in these outside free agents. If it's shedding Drake Kirkpatrick, that contract, if that was the most significant move, if making the upgrade to Trey Waynes was the most significant move. You mentioned DJ Reader. I think that's kind of the predictable answer, but a lot to like this free agency period. I'm wondering what you thought was maybe the best or wisest move by the team this spring.
I think it's actually the fact that they just did it. I think that was the thing that needed to happen. I think the fact that you had a bunch of people nationally and locally saying for a very long time, why do they operate this way in free agency? And when you look at where they're at, I think this was as we wrote, I think in February, I think the Bengals front office more than anything was on the clock this offseason. I mean, at this point, what the roster is. You're at the bottom of a rebuild. You've got a lot of old veterans on this team. And if you want to win quickly and you want to show your coaching staff and the current players that you have and Joe Burrow that, yes, you're interested in winning championships, because, what Carson Palmer says, holds a lot of, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And the fact that, when I came into town, there was a lot of people asking, well, what are the Browns doing? What are the Blackburns doing to really field a championship level team? And I think the Bengals had to answer that question this offseason because you knew that the roster needed upgrades across the board. And so I give them a ton of credit for just going out and spending the money. And even if it doesn't work, at least you can say you tried. I think, they think the old adage is big risk, big reward. And I was talking to a player before they made all these moves, and it was like, okay, same old, like, we're not going to spend anything. And then all of a sudden all these deals came through. And then I think that was a big just a momentum boost for the guys who are still on the roster currently. This is, they're willing to give us the pieces that we need to be successful. I think you can make the argument that it kind of started with Preston Brown last year. I think that was the tipping point. The fact that he got cut mid-season was a sign of, okay, there things might be changing in the way that they operate here, because they were quick. Preston was just re-signed the previous offseason, and then they immediately cut weight. There was a lot of factors that went into that decision. And that was I think that showed that, okay, maybe they're going to be more aggressive in roster building. And we saw that in free agency. But if you look at a single player, I think DJ Reader is a no-brainer. I think they need somebody like that in the middle of the defense, especially if Lou Anarumo's playing a 3-4, which is what, if I pressed him on this a ton last year, and he was very adamant that this is, I know that we're kind of in, maybe 4-2-5 a ton of the time. We're playing with a lot of 5D linemen, but in my mind, I view this as a 3-4, especially when I'm dropping Sam and Carlos as much as I am. And in that case, you need a every down defensive, basically a 1-tech or a 2-tech, and DJ Reader is that guy. I don't know if Geno Atkins is going to be that guy for them anymore. I think what you saw last year, where they rested him heavy, they brought him in on third down packages, I think that's what we're going to see out of Geno. And they even said last year they probably played him too many snaps. And so that being said, it makes sense that they went out and got this nose tackle who they believe is the best in the NFL.
So just like DJ Reader, you also come from Texas. You hail from Texas. If anybody falls into it. Yeah, that's for sure. In this draft specifically, are there any guys, maybe not more in the early rounds, maybe in the later rounds, who not only went to college in Texas, but also went to high school in Texas? Are there any guys that you're familiar with who come from Texas, specifically the Dallas-Fort Worth area that you're more familiar with?
Man, I'm trying to think. It's crazy. Once you switch jobs, like I remember in the middle of the year, as you're switching jobs, you're always thinking of, okay, what is the you're always looking back at what you did. Like everywhere I've been, I've always kept tabs when I was like, oh, the old high school area I covered. And then last year I was like, oh, I'm still watching some A&M and SEC games, even though I was sick of A&M by the time I stopped covering them. Like we were about to come to blows with some people over there. And so it's funny, like as I've gotten now, I'm like, I wake up, I go to bed at night and I wake up, I'm thinking about, oh, what are the Bengals doing in free agency? Like what's going on here, and keeping a lot of that, a lot of track of those things. I think Courtney Davis will be interesting. I think that he probably wasn't as good as his numbers indicated, or I think he wasn't as bad as his number indicated at Texas A&M. I think he could be a late round steal. I'm really curious at my alma mater, as you see the flying worm in the corner there in North Texas. Yeah, Mason Fine is a really fascinating candidate. He doesn't really have the measurables at all, and he probably got hurt. He's like a lot of guys who got hurt by not having the draft, the pro days, and not being able for guys to come and see him. And he's always been really undersized, but he put up a lot of good numbers and had a little bit of a Heisman backing behind him before last year at North Texas. So I think he'll be one to watch, maybe in the later rounds if he gets drafted. I don't think we've had anybody drafted in like 16 or 17 years. Like it's been a long time. North Texas is. So I'm looking at there. James Prochet out of SMU. I think he's going to be the real deal. I think he's a really good mid-round receiver. So there's guys, when you talk about the state of Texas, it's insane how many guys are out there. I remember covering Jamal Adams when he was a junior in high school, back when he had like I heard about he had a burner account that was all over the place. Those were unconfirmed sources. Was never able to pin it down. So I don't know if Jamal had it or not. So, but I remember watching him, Solomon Thomas, you name it. We had a bunch of guys out there. I was talking to Tyus Bowser. I covered the credentials on the wall right behind me, how he got knocked out in the playoffs. And he was still pissed about it. Like it was fun talking to him. He was still mad that they didn't win that game. So there's a lot of guys. Justin Madubuike would have been a really interesting candidate had the Bengals not got Reader. But now I don't think it makes sense for them to go get another D tackle of that caliber. But Madubuike I think will end up being a really good prospect out of A&M, and he's a guy that both coaching staffs that they had were really impressed with him. So I think that's one to watch. But obviously he's going to be off the board now.
Well, we're going to get to some 2020 prospect watch list candidates a little bit later in the show, and one of mine is actually a young man out of Houston, University of Houston. So teaser on that one. Talking with Ben Baby of ESPN. We're going to get him out of here in just a minute. Appreciate the time, Ben. I want to – well, John and I think we'll probably close up again with a little more draft talk because that's now on deck. A couple of years ago – the Bengals drafted Jesse Bates, and he wasn't really, around this time of year when we do the mock drafts and everything, there are a lot of usual suspect names and a lot of guys in certain rounds that seem to make sense. I'm curious if you have any ideas on some of these dark horse guys that may be coming to the Bengals' interest late in the process here, or names that maybe we haven't heard much about that, second round, third round, day 3, some of these guys that we should be paying attention to that maybe aren't on a lot of fans' radars right now.
Yeah, I could vamp and just give you a bunch of names, but I'm going to be quite honest. I would think I'd be doing y'all a disservice because I haven't heard any names like that yet. I'm sure they'll start to trickle out. And let's be honest, if a team is smart, they're not going to leak those names out because they want those guys to be steals when they go get them in the mid rounds. But I think it's an interesting draft. I wouldn't be shocked. I think the best thing to do is what positions would go best. I think honestly, there's a lot of people who are true draftniks who have really studied it day in and day out, maybe more so than I have. But I think when you go look at the positions that they probably need to target, like offensive tackle, I think would be an interesting one, maybe in round 3 or round 4, because I don't know if they're going to do that in round 2. I think if in a perfect world, they trade down off of 33 and go get a receiver and a linebacker. And I think especially when you got Josh Bynes, I think that he's a perfect guy. I think one of the aspects that they liked about him was his leadership, and that's something that was actually lacking on the defensive side of the ball when he talked to basically everybody over there. And he's right now, I think if the season started today, he would be the day one starter. But what's fascinating is if they went up and they got somebody high in the second round at linebacker, I would be curious to see if he would end up working his way into the starting lineup and then Bynes would kind of bring him along. And I think that either of those options exist. So I think for me right now, I'm really most fascinated about what they do in the second round. And we went back and looked at the numbers, and I think the Bengals have been really good. And I think Duke Tobin deserves a ton of credit for finding guys in the third round, the fourth round, the fifth round, even your Jesse Bateses of the world, who I saw at the Belk Bowl and said, this guy's an incredible athlete. I think, last year it was a tough situation because he was basically just had no help over the top, and he basically was the last line of defense for how jerry-rigged that defense was last year under Lou Anarumo. And so I think it's right now you want to go get a wide receiver and a linebacker, and I think that would help them out a lot, and then you'd see what they would do. And you've got to go spend, we looked at the numbers, you've got to go spend at some point high round picks on the defensive side of the ball. When you go look at it, the Bengals, you look at their starters, they hadn't really done that in quite some time. You'll look at the players that they have starting. I mean, Dre was a first-round pick, so many years ago. William Jackson was a first-round pick. I think that's an interesting one. We'll see. I think this is going to be a huge year for him because he didn't have the year that he liked and maybe the coaching staff would have liked last season. But at some point, I know you don't want to reach for guys and draft guys for the sake of drafting guys, but you do need to eventually address some of these positions, and you can't expect to field an elite unit or with guys that you're picking up and hoping to hit on in the late rounds. When you talk about, especially when you talk to the coaching staff and players, they go, look at some of these other defenses we're playing against in the AFC North and go count how many first round guys they have over there. Go count the guys on the Steelers starting defense. He goes, all those guys are first round players. And it's not just the ability, it's the mentality that comes with that as well. And that's something that a lot of guys talked about last year when we talked about the subject.
Ben, we're gonna get you out of here. One more question. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. I've got time, man. If y'all want to rip off a few more, I'm going to be writing all night. So anything that puts that off and lets me procrastinate, I'm all for it.
One final question, because this is one that fans are really intrigued about. It's obviously been a lot of talk about receiver day 2, definitely a linebacker early. The offensive line seems to be the position that I think fans are more concerned about than what the team is. And it's been pretty clear that the team is at least comfortable with the projected 5 that they have and maybe a couple other guys who can develop behind them. Do you think that that's incredibly real and palpable, or do you think that there's a chance that we could see a surprise early offensive line pick, maybe at the top of round 2?
Top of round 2, I think that would be probably a little too high. I think right now, it could happen. I think that's a possibility if you have the right guy, maybe some guy who you think can play right tackle or maybe right guard. I think that would be. You look at Michael Jordan and where they drafted him, and he ended up starting for them last year, and apparently he's a guy that they like, and we'll see how he continues to develop. So, they've obviously shown, and Jim Turner's an interesting guy. To say the least, and when he likes someone, he's going to ride with them. So if he finds a guy that he likes in the mid rounds, they may say, hey, Jim's grade may be better than what, we'll wait until the 4th round because I like this guy more than someone else. So I think it really depends on what Turner's evaluations are going to be. I'm fascinated to see how that turns out because I watched him at A&M, and I think some of his evaluations were hit or misses, and I think he'd be the first one to probably agree with that. And if not, then we probably have to have a different conversation with Jimmy. But I think that you would. Second round's probably a little too high for an offensive lineman, but also I think they're leaving the door open to go and see what's out there. I would be curious to see what happens after the 53-man cuts, I guess the 55 or whatever that is, because the Bengals will have, I think this is the thing that we need to watch, and is that the Bengals will have the first pick of the waiver wire, and somebody on the coaching staff said that is actually going to be huge. So, Anthony, I have a feeling like you mentioned this.
I did.
Yes, this is, and this is something that they're very cognizant of as well, which is one of the benefits of having the first overall pick. So, I think that for them, you say, okay, is it worth us reaching and spending a mid-round pick on a guy that maybe we wouldn't like? And why not just wait until the end if we feel good enough? So I think it really depends on what's on the board, because like you said, they this offseason they've shown that they like enough what they would have if they had to start the season tomorrow, the 5 that they have. But they're definitely, you can get a sense of they're definitely looking to make some improvements if they're available, and it's within their budget.
Absolutely, Ben. Again, thank you so much for coming on. It was great. It was great meeting you down in training camp and in the Senior Bowl. And if we can get you on again sometime soon, maybe after the draft or maybe sometime before the season, we'd absolutely love that. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us, man.
Yeah, for sure. Before I go though, Anthony, who was your Houston guy?
Josh Jones.
Okay. I'm a fan. Yeah, Houston's done a really good job recruiting over the years, and I think, there's a lot of sneaky good athletes that come out of there, and especially when you look at where they're at and where they're situated. So more often than not, you're going to find a guy there. But I like that. That's a good name. So. Yeah,
actually, last year when we did our final mock draft, Ben, I had Ed Oliver as their pick, and he was creeping there, and I was like, oh my goodness, if he can just land there. Nothing wrong with Jonah Williams. I mean, I know he had the injury and everything, and I ended up being good with that pick. But as he was getting there to 8-9, I was like, oh my gosh, this actually. When I made the pick, I'm like, this could be a little bit of a pipe dream, but the way wacky things happen, and lo and behold, he was there pretty close, but.
I cannot believe Ed Oliver dropped that far. I'm dumbfounded. I mean, you knew him from whatever he was at. I think he was at Spring Westfield back in the day, and just an absolute stud. I mean, Tom Herman went and hired his high school coach and recruited his brother just to get Ed to Houston. And I remember asking a guy who was tougher to block, who's the toughest guy they had to block, and they said Ed Oliver by a mile. And I think the guy had blocked Myles Garrett. And like Ed Oliver's the real deal. And so I was just sitting there just pulling my hair out. I said, what are you guys doing? So We'll see. Then we might see someone falling this year to the Bengals at 33 that way. And, I'm sure Lou Anarumo will take all the help he can get if he can get a defensive guy at that spot.
Yeah. Well, I want to echo John's sentiments, man. It's been a pleasure. You are a rock star, and we would love to have you back on in the very near future if you're willing and able to do so.
Of course, man. Thank y'all for having me. I really had fun.
All right. Take it easy, Ben. Appreciate it. That was Ben Baby of ESPN. Obviously, you are very familiar with his work on the Bengals beat, one of the go-to guys for information as it pertains to the Cincinnati Bengals. John, thank you so much for coordinating that with Ben. I know you've had a couple face-to-face meetings, and that developed into a cool relationship where he can come on to the show. And man, that was awesome. That was awesome.
Not because when me and Nick Manchester at Cincinnati Jungle and Jake Lisko locked on, when we came down to training camp back in August, we met some of the guys, and Ben was just the guy that was keeping up with us and talking with us and just being real. And that's all you can ask for in that position. So he's a great human being in person, and obviously a great interview as well. So can't wait to have him back on. I think we got some people in the comments that want that as well. So we'll try to get that as soon as possible.
Yeah. Give the fans what they want. You gotta bring them back. Yeah. And what's really cool about Ben coming on this program, we sometimes have had a little bit of difficulty getting folks from ESPN on the program. ESPN can kind of tighten the reins a little bit on some of their reporters, and unfortunately, that's kind of been the case in the past. But Ben was willing to come on the program, and can't thank him enough for that. Awesome stuff. Great. Seems like a great dude. I would love to meet him face to face at some point. Same thing with James Rapine, who's been on this show before. Really affable guy, and Ben seems like the same and very knowledgeable. He hasn't been on the beat long, but he seems to know totally what's going on, and is pretty well versed into what this team is trying to do this offseason.
I think you can tell which beat guys are football guys, and which guys are just kind of transferred into football. But Ben, I think, has always been surrounded by football. He threw in some verbiage in there that we don't normally hear from other beat writers as well. So I hope he stays around ESPN a long time, because Bengals have had a lot of good ESPN beat reporters, like Cat Terrell is a great example of that. So just continuing that lineage of great ESPN guys.
Yeah, Cat was awesome. Big shoes to fill, but he's doing a very, very good job, and we are very thankful for Ben Baby coming on this show, and thank you to ESPN for allowing him to do so. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've got more coming at you in just a few minutes in the form of a soundbite of the week, as well as our 2020 prospect watch. We continue that, so we'll get to those in just a minute. But as always, you can get the show on a number of different platforms. Your audio podcast platform of choice, basically: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio. It's everywhere. We can't thank you enough for the support. And obviously, you can get the show if you like the video stuff. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, get it there. All of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com. Before we move on to the soundbite of the week, John, I just want to say, and I feel a little sappy every week when I'm like, thanks for the support. And sometimes it falls on deaf ears. Guys, we have seen an enormous spike in downloads, in views of the YouTube channels, all this kind of stuff. It's not just our show. It's Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk. It's Orange is the New Black. We've had some sporadic episodes of Sorry If I Spit When I Speak, where John's a co-host there as well, with Daddy-O McDuke and Hoji Smoji. But look, we know that the Bengals, interesting offseason, the hype around the pick, and that's building interest level up, and obviously you want to get your Bengals fixed. The quarantine thing has you maybe tuning into some things a little more frequently. We recognize that. We are very thankful that we are part of a rotation of things that you listen to when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals. And let me tell you something: when we say, John, that we're, lately this last 2 months, month and a half, we've had just this string of awesome interviews, awesome guests, high profile guests. Well, I tell you what, they're looking at our download numbers. They're looking at our views. They're looking at this stuff and saying, hey, these guys are getting people engaged, and we want to get on the show. You guys are driving the train. The listeners are, and it's helping us get these type of guests on our show. So I have to say thank you once again.
It's just like Brad Pitt said in Glorious Bastards, they're in the killing Nazi business. Well, we're in the talking Bengals business. And business is a booming.
Business is a booming. That's right. I like that one. You got a little dose of Tarantino there. I like that.
It's top 2 Tarantino, undoubtedly.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's a good one. But so thank you to our listeners. Get the show how you can. And once again, thank you to Ben Baby of ESPN for joining us. John, it's time for the soundbite of the week. We've done this somewhat regularly over the past handful of months. Somewhat new segment on the show. Basically, in case you are new to the program, what we do is we like to share and play a specific audio video clip for you pertaining to the Cincinnati Bengals, and then we like to discuss about it, kind of talk, center a little topic around the soundbite. Oftentimes it's been, more national media around this time of year talking about Joe Burrow and all that kind of stuff. We had a discussion with Ben Baby just a couple minutes ago that, where he said he thought that the likely outcome of the Andy Dalton situation is that he will be released to get that salary off the books. There probably isn't a viable trade partner out there any longer. So with that, Jeremy Rausch of Fox 19 in Cincinnati recently interviewed Zach Taylor. And in it, Andy Dalton was a topic of conversation. So we will play this clip for you, and, talking about maybe even the potential of Andy Dalton sticking around with the Bengals if they draft Joe Burrow. But here is the clip. We will play it for you now.
Something I asked Zach, and simply I wanted to know if the Bengals do draft, let's say Joe Burrow, and all of the offseason and even preseason workouts are canceled because of COVID-19, maybe even up until training camp, would the Bengals benefit from keeping Andy Dalton around, knowing full well that whoever they draft, again, likely Joe Burrow, cannot be on the field until at least August? Here's what Zach told me.
That's why I think it's important for us to just take it week to week, because everything seems to be changing weekly. When we say we're keeping all of our options on the table, that's one of the options you keep on the table for those very reasons. And so again, we're in a position right now where Andy's under contract, and we just want to make sure that we're making the best decisions for the club.
Something I asked Zach, and simply I wanted to know if the Bengals do draft.
So, John, interesting note there. I think when we look at this situation, we fail to realize the COVID-19 situation where, a player can, just the timing throwing everything off. And I think that's an interesting point that Jeremy pointed out when he spoke with Zach Taylor. By the way, if you listen to some of the clips of Zach Taylor, you can understand why he's an engaging dude. It's kind of like, oh, okay, that's why you landed this job. But I still think that the Cincinnati Bengals will probably trade or release him. I don't see the locker room dynamic working.
I know.
But I do see a little bit of the logic in, okay, maybe it takes a while for Burrow to get to camp or whatever, however long this drags out. You've got a guy familiar with the system. You've got a guy that emergency starter. I understand the logic in some of that, but I still think that you're not going to see Andy Dalton play for the Cincinnati Bengals this year.
Oh, for sure. I think keeping him until the draft and seeing what happens with that is probably the most likely scenario, because a team could get desperate and miss out on a quarterback or not have the draft go exactly what they want at the position. They could swing like a 5th or 6th round pick for Dalton. I can absolutely see that. As far as that goes with the whole quarantine screwing up the schedule, people may not remember, but Andy Dalton's first year, he didn't practice with the team until late July because the NFL had a lot because of the CBA and whatever. And that was at the time when Carson was technically still on the team, but he didn't want to be. He was obviously going to sit out the season. They traded him in October. I don't think it's going to wait that long, obviously, for Andy. I think they're going to have a more, ideal finish to the relationship, and it's not going to, spur into something as catastrophic as that was. But I don't really think I'm with you on this one, where it's like, yeah, Andy Dalton is fine as a backup, but I think with that salary, with that contract that you gave him as your franchise quarterback, and then to bring in the next franchise quarterback who you are 100% comfortable with playing early, there's just you're right. The dynamic in the locker room and just on the roster and the depth chart itself, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because obviously if you had to pick between Andy Dalton and Ryan Finley, who would you rather have as your backup quarterback, you would take Dalton 10 times out of 10. But I don't think that's just an apt scenario or comparison in this way. It's just moving on from Dalton, moving on from his time in that era of the 2010s, going with just Burrow and your 2 young backups to just groom behind him. That just makes all the sense in the world. And they can technically keep Dalton and not be in the red and in the salary cap, I think, because the draft pool for rookies, draft picks, and undrafted free agents, I think it accounts for $7.5 million against the cap, and right now they're just at about $8 million. So if they keep Dalton even with that contract, they can still be in the positive in terms of salary cap space, but they've never been that comfortable being that close to the salary cap limit. So it just makes all the sense in the world for them to just get that contract off the books and get a little more comfort with that. But you're right. Like, the dynamic here just doesn't make a lot of sense, even though, from a roster standpoint, you would like a more talented backup than Ryan Finley. But like you said, it's not necessary based off what Dalton had to go through. And I think you would be more confident that Joe Burrow will be able to keep in communication with his new receivers and his coaching staff and be ready to go whenever that is.
The other dynamic that I think a lot of people I think all of us kind of said, hey, that with the frenzy of free agency, someone's going to spring for a trade. Someone's going to deal for him. There are QB needy teams. We didn't know exactly. I kind of thought Brady was going to stay with New England. That whole thing was kind of surprising to me a bit. There were some things where, okay, the Bears would go for him with the Bill Lazor connection, maybe Jay Gruden in Jacksonville, that sort of thing. The Jacksonville thing still kind of sits on the periphery, right, as a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But the options are small. I agree with Ben that the likeliest outcome is that he will be released. But there's also an opportunity that the Bengals hang on to. Like you said, they're not really on the hook salary cap wise. I mean, they can hang on to him for a little while and see what happens throughout the draft. If a team didn't get a quarterback that they wanted in the draft, they may come calling for Dalton for a late pick or a pick next year. Or during the draft, there might be, hey, you know, all the top QBs we had on our board are gone. We'll give you a day 3 pick for Dalton. Maybe the Bengals at that point take it. Or, God forbid, when camps do start, there's the inevitable injury and a team comes calling. The Bengals hang on to Andy Dalton, and he's the white knight for a team that needs a viable starting quarterback, and the Bengals get some form of a deal there. That's an opportunity, but I still think, as Ben said, the release is probably the likeliest outcome.
It's just so weird to just like to have that be your plan, to just keep him with the expectation to just trade him in August, just keep him around without letting him choose whatever opportunity that comes to him, even in the summer. It just feels like it just doesn't feel like something that they would do with a player that they have the relationship with. And just to clarify something that I said earlier, that in the offseason, like the draft pool accounts for only 7.5. As soon as the top 51 rule takes in place, those rookie contracts, they get a part of the salary cap, and then they have to comply with those salary cap rules. It's something that I just learned actually today from John Baines, who, just like Andre Parada, is a Bengals Twitter salary cap aficionado. So definitely follow him at the John Baines, or John the Baines, excuse me, if you want a little more information about that stuff. But yeah, financially, they're okay to keep him for now. But it just seems like the longer that they do and they don't trade him, it just the worse the situation can potentially get.
Yeah, and they've said that they want to do, quote unquote, want to do right by Andy Dalton. They want to put him in a good situation and make sure, you know, what that actually means. Who knows, you know, if that's placing him in an immediate starting spot or a place where he can still keep his contract or whatever the case may be. I don't know, but they have said they want to be diplomatic to him in that situation. He has said he wants to start, he wants to play. Age-wise, he still has theoretically productive years left. So, you know, there's just got to be a suitor and an option. And unfortunately, whether it was a lack of, we haven't really gotten a clear answer, whether it was a total lack of demand or the Bengals having too high of a demand for a price, maybe both, you know, he hasn't been moved. But for now, it looks like he'll probably be released at some point. They'll probably hang on to him for a bit to see if they can get something out of him. And then, you know, because they want to do right by him, they may release him before camps, etc., so he can latch onto an opportunity instead of right before a season or in season or something like that. But interesting. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and just like to answer a question from the comment section, is it from Jamie Krieg, is it better for Andy if he gets traded or cut? It just depends on where he gets traded to. Like, he can want an opportunity to go wherever he wants, but if he gets traded like that, the team would presumably take on the remainder of his contract. If he gets cut, there's no way he's getting $17 million just for 1 year or however many years on a per year basis. So if he gets traded to a team that can, you know, give him the opportunity to start, that would obviously be the best case for him, for the Bengals as well, because they want any compensation that they can get at this point. But also, you know, the opportunities could be better if he just gets cut and finds his own way, even if the money is going to be less.
Yeah. So Cincinnati has some decisions to make there, but in all likelihood, Andy Dalton will not be with the Cincinnati Bengals. You heard a diplomatic answer from Zach Taylor via Jeremy Roush of Fox 19, and a little bit of an evasive answer, but it just doesn't seem like it's in the cards that he'll be the guy to back up Joe Burrow coming this fall. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You just heard the soundbite of the week, and before that, you heard an interview with Ben Baby of ESPN. We're going to get to our 2020 prospect watch list in just a second, but as I mentioned earlier, you can get this show on a number of different platforms. Download it from your favorite audio podcast platform. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our audio channel as well. So you get notified when we're going live. You get notified when new shows on the channel, on the Cincy Jungle podcast channel, are coming on to the slate. So you can download them right away, listen to them. By the way, we haven't really set too much yet in terms of what we're going to be doing for the draft, but we will have a ton of podcast content when it comes to that. When we lay everything out, that'll probably be laid out over the next week or so. We will definitely let you know. Mock drafts leading up to the big event, breaking down every pick, breaking down every day, that sort of thing. That'll be not only part of this podcast's programming, but also that of Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk, Orange is the New Black from Ace Boogie and Zim Houday, and maybe even a little bit more from, sorry if I spit when I speak, the boys, Daddy-O MacDuke and Dr. Hoji Smoji. John, let's continue. We're running out of weeks to do the prospect watch. We're getting so close to the draft here, but let's continue the 2020 prospect watch list. I've got my guy. I teased him earlier. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. Sure.
Coin flip it. Okay.
Sure. It seems like a lot of the years we have a decent idea about players that the Bengals are targeting, and then there's always one pick that kind of goes in line with that thinking, but it's just a different player. So right now there's a lot of talk about Lloyd Cushenberry, Damian Lewis, offensive linemen that Joe Burrow has experience with, guys who could fill starting slots early. But a guy who's intriguing me right now is Sadiq Charles, and he was the third, draft eligible lineman for LSU that's going to get drafted somewhat early. And I think he fits more of what the Bengals are looking for in an offensive lineman. For starters, I don't think he's going to be a top 100 pick. And I don't think that the Bengals are going to be I think they're going to be interested in other positions other than the offensive line. I think, like Ben said, unless someone drops out of round one and they just can't resist taking this guy in the second round, then I don't think that offensive line is too much of a priority for them. I think they want somebody who they can develop later on, but at the same time can give them somebody who can compete with Su'a-Filo at right guard, but can also have the versatility to compete down the line at right tackle. They value versatility extremely, but they also value some other things. I look back to Mike Jordan from last year, another fourth-round pick, a guy who was a 3-year starter from his freshman year at Ohio State, one of the first guys to start, or one of the first guys at the offensive line in a long time to start his true freshman year. He came into the league at 21 years old, very athletic. All of those boxes I just mentioned, Sadiq Charles checks them off as well. He was a 3-year starter at LSU. He's not even 21 years old yet, and he started over 20 games at left tackle, most of them with Joe Burrow there, but he also has experience at other positions. I think he started one game at right guard, one game at right tackle, so not a lot of experience at other positions, but he has the ability to play other positions, and I think they have comfortability to play him at other positions. So he has the ability to play inside, outside. 6'4", 320 pounds, ran a 5.05 540. I think he fits the size thresholds that they look for. I think he fits the athleticism that they want in guys who are playing at guard, guys who have explosion and speed, who can get out in space. The one main knock on him is obviously he's not talented enough to be like a top 50 pick or anything, but he could slide into late day 2 if there wasn't these potential character issues. He was suspended for 6 games in last season for the 2019 season. He missed a good chunk of that season. He had multiple failed drug tests, I believe, as well. I think Dane Brugler said a scout told him, like, I want to trust him, but unfortunately I just can't. And you have to wonder if that is a palpable thing that's been trickling all throughout the NFL, and if it's really going to affect where he ends up getting drafted. I think it'll depend entirely on how much the Bengals trust him as just a person, and that is going to, these meetings that they're having right now, these FaceTime meetings, you can't learn obviously as much from these players, talking to them on a computer screen, whereas normally you get the chance to, be with them in person and get a feel for them. I would imagine they probably had some time at the combine to talk to him as well. But I just think that in terms of what they're looking for on field only, what they're looking for from an offensive lineman this year, the boxes that they usually look to get checked off in terms of age, size, versatility, I think Charles fits a lot of those. And I think obviously the familiarity with Joe Burrow at quarterback, I think that's going to help him as well. So if they wait until round 4, I think Charles is the guy that you absolutely have to look at as a potential pick for them.
So I'm interested in the, you mentioned the off-field issue stuff. That would be interesting to see if the Bengals spring for a guy like this, because last offseason, Zach Taylor espoused quite a bit of rhetoric on character. We don't want guys that, are going to put us in a bad position in terms of PR or missing games, on-field performance. Mark Walton, example one. I mean, we talked a long time ago about what Zach Taylor had to endure as a first-time head coach and everything that came his way, especially in the first few months of his tenure. Mark Walton gets arrested, 3 times in 3 months or something like that. So, he had to cut bait there and kind of made a statement. There were some other guys, Vontaze Burfict, granted not the arrest stuff side, but on-field stuff, suspension stuff, cut bait there. So, there are some things there that make me wonder if Charles, if they say, okay, well, day 3, we like the talent, we like the versatility, we like the size, we like all of these things, potential, as you can see here, what we're sharing on NFL.com. They think there's potential there to become a starter. They like all of these things, and they like that enough to overlook the suspension stuff, John. I don't know. I don't know if you have extra opinions on that, but that to me would be an interesting scenario for them.
Right. It like everything that they talk about, just building a culture. A guy on paper who has this rap rapport or this rap sheet, if you will, and these types of issues that he's had in his past. It's entirely up to how they can handle the situation. Because Zach Taylor talked about a lot of this stuff in his opening press conference. Then he goes out and hire, Jim Turner, his old friend, who had a lot of issues in the past as well. So, a lot of that talk can obviously applies, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, but it comes down to how they feel they can manage it on a person-to-person basis. Obviously, he's a young guy. He's not even 21 years old yet. I think they would also take input from Burrow to see his opinion on him, as well as how he interacts in the locker room. And clearly, if they don't go after him, I'm not going to be upset, because there is a definite risk that a guy like that may not be able to fulfill his potential because he just doesn't work hard enough, or he just puts himself in bad positions, in bad situations to not fulfill that potential. And that's why he's likely going to be off some draft boards as well. It just comes down to how they feel comfortable in the conversations that they've had with him, what they hear about from Burrow, because I think from an on-field perspective, he's basically exactly what they're looking for in terms of a guy who can fill in at right guard maybe early and then move out to tackle because he has that experience. But again, if they don't go after him because he has too many issues, 100% fine with that. Yeah,
the other aspect to it, John, to a player like that in a draft like this year is the lack of face-to-face time, right? I mean, I feel like a guy like that, it is critical for a team to get in front of that guy, talk to him, have the, look me in the eye type of cliches and, talk to them, get a feel for them. Whereas you can't really do that at this point right now. And, if he has matured and moved beyond some of this stuff that has plagued him in the past, you'd hate to see a weird situation that we're currently living in drastically affect his professional life if he's moved on from that. So that's another element to throw into that. I'm glad you went offensive line though, because I did as well. And John, before I transition into my guy, Ben brought up something, and it was something I was thinking about today because I was looking at the young man I'm going to present in just a second for the prospect watch list. But, Ben brought up the situation of Preston Brown and how that may have been one of the quote unquote best moves by the team, getting rid of that contract and, a player that just was not performing well for this team. I almost look at, clearing space. They got rid of Dre Kirkpatrick. We didn't think that was going to happen. Preston Brown, they're going to move on from Andy Dalton. Even though they said they like the state of their offensive line, if they get an opportunity at a guy, whether it's Sadiq Charles or Josh Jones, the young man I'm going to talk about, is there a situation where they say, hey, we like this kid, we're going to get out of that Bobby Hart contract?
I think that's entirely possible because they designed that contract to be, to allow themselves to get out of it early if they want to. I think what Hart showed last year is that it depends entirely upon who he's facing. Like, he'll have good weeks when they just don't have, when the opposing team doesn't have anybody who can threaten the edge. But when he's going up against, above average talent, he's a liability. And I think that's why there's they're talking about Fred Johnson so much because they're going to give him every chance to beat out Bobby Hart. But at the end of the day, if Fred Johnson is your backup swing tackle, that's probably something you're more comfortable with. So if they have the opportunity to get somebody that they know can beat Bobby Hart from day one and can be a starting tackle for the next few years on a rookie contract, I think that's absolutely something that they entertain. It's just a matter of if they're going to find a guy that they have graded that high, because, if not, they're going to be interested in other positions as well.
Right. And it's another one of those things that we say, look, we've said for a long time they're not going to move on. It's just not the Bengals' way to do that. But they've got themselves out of some bad contracts in the past, 6 months or so to really clear up space and make impactful moves. Whether it's Preston Brown, Drake Kirkpatrick, they're going to move on from Andy Dalton, it seems. And, maybe Bobby Hart is the next guy. Who knows? But the gentleman I'm going to talk about, I teased it earlier with our interview, is Josh Jones, the offensive tackle from the University of Houston. Now, a lot of people have him as talent-wise a top half of the first round type, a top 16 type of guy, top 15 player in this year's draft, and a lot to like here. But in terms of the Bengals, he in a lot of mock drafts, again, how reliable can those be? You shrug your shoulders sometimes at those, but in a lot of mock drafts, he's available at the top of the second round. He's been mocked to the Bengals quite frequently at the top of the second round. So he could be a guy at number 33 they look at, or if they make the rare move to maybe move back into the end of the first round, and he's still lingering out there, this could be a guy for them. He also could be a victim of a deep tackle class. It's a very top-heavy tackle class, no pun intended, in terms of talent with this group. There are a lot of guys, 2 Georgia kids that are very good. You got Tristan Wirfs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Mekhi Becton, we've previewed many of them. Austin Jackson, another guy we've put on our prospect watch list. So there is a lot of guys, and it's kind of the, take your pick. I mean, there are a lot of guys that are potential first or high-end second-round talents, and this kid could fall to the Bengals at the top of the second. That's why I think I previewed him as a viable guy. Now, some notes with him. You see great size, 6'5", about, what did we say there? About 320. So very big guy, very athletic guy. I did some research on him, looked at some film. This kid, and thanks to our good friend Austin Gale at Pro Football Focus, who came on the program a little while back, he and Mike Renner had a nice breakdown of him. They noted that he had I believe it was a 93.2 overall grade as an offensive lineman this last year, the highest of a non-Power 5 player, I think, ever. And not, I don't think just tackle. I think non-Power 5 player ever. And I don't mean to misquote them, but I thought that's what they said. He is also, per their reports, he has also risen every year in terms of overall grade. He's steadily improved. There is the aspect of the 89.2 pass blocking grade. So everything tells you, 89.2 this last year, everything tells you high-end talent, very technically sound, wins a lot of battles in the trenches. He was a left tackle, and though he was a non-Power 5 on a non-Power 5 team, they play a lot of top teams. I mean, they play Oklahoma. They play a lot of big-name schools. So he's not going up against, small school after small school. He's going up against legit talent. So a lot to like here. Very athletic. I think some knocks on him that I heard, some people question his strength. I don't really see it as too much of an issue. I mean, he's not an absolute mauler like a Mekhi Becton, but he's athletic and he's got good length. Some concerns are in some of the offensive formations that Houston used, and if you're going to use him as a true left tackle day one, you may have to retrain him on some things. So, that's a concern. Where I think is a totally invalid concern. Some people are talking about his age as compared to some of these other guys. He's older. To me, as you've seen, as you mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, that as you've seen the progression every year in terms of overall PFF score from year to year, an increase. I just think that his age actually works in his advantage, where that he may be more ready now than some of these other guys. And some of the scores show that. The situation for the Bengals, if they were to select him, it presents an interesting situation, John, because, does Josh Jones, does he become your left tackle and you move Jonah Williams over there to right side? Do you start Jonah at left tackle, and because you think you may have to retrain some of these nuances of the position to Josh Jones, maybe you put him on the right side and have Jonah Williams stay on the left side for at least 2020, then maybe you make a later swap. I don't know, but I think that those two guys, especially if Jonah Williams pans out like we hope, I think that those two guys could be very, very high-end bookend tackles for this team.
When I was talking about it, if there's a guy who falls out of round 1 that could intrigue him, Josh Jones is the first guy that comes to my mind. I know a lot of people like Austin Jackson. I think there's more questions with him than a guy like Jones because, like you said, coming from Houston, no, that's where William Jackson's from, so they have experience drafting this school high as well. But coming from Houston, non-Power 5 school, I think you got to compare to not only just the competition, but the type of offense that he was in. I believe PFF recently tweeted out in true pass sets, he took 114 of those at Houston last year. He had an 82 overall pass blocking grade, and that rivals right up with Andrew Thomas, who had an 83.5 grade. Tristan Wirfs had an 84 grade. He took more true pass sets last year, actually, than Jedrick Wills, the guy from Alabama. So that should tell you a lot about who really is running a pro-style offense nowadays, because Alabama is not exactly the type of offense that you once thought of about 10 years ago. So I think those questions I think are mostly solved. In terms of competition, down at the Senior Bowl, that was the big question. Like, he dominated in the latter part of 2019, but it was against Houston. You would like to see him against how did he do against the top seniors, pass rushers, defensive linemen? He dominated the Senior Bowl. He didn't just do it at left tackle either. He was at right tackle. He was even at right guard. So those 3 positions, that's what the Bengals are looking for. They're looking for depth at left tackle, and they're looking for guys who can compete at either right guard or right tackle spot. Size, speed, athleticism, how he did against good competition at an event that they had their entire coaching staff with. I think this guy is a perfect fit if he falls to that spot. And it's going to be a matter of, okay, who else goes? Because right now, Daniel Jeremiah of NFL.com is saying that Isaiah Wilson out of Georgia, he's like a surefire first-round pick. He could even go before Andrew Thomas, but Thomas, Wirfs, Becton, Wills, they're all going to go top 15. You throw Wilson in there, you throw in Jackson in there. That's 6 offensive tackles. Normally, you don't see 7 get drafted in one round. So if that's the scenario, there could be a chance where Jones is just the odd man out, and he ends up being one of those guys that just inexplicably drops out of the first round. And if that's the case, then the Bengals draft plans potentially go out the window, and they just go after the best player available in Jones, who ends up filling multiple spots. He can compete early at right guard, and then he can down the line compete at right tackle because he has the capabilities to do either.
It drives me nuts, John, when people say, no way that guy's going to be there. No way that guy's going to be there. It's like my biggest pet peeve come draft time, because every year there are people that fall. And to your point, you mentioned 5 or 6 offensive tackles there, a couple of which are kind of in that same tier with him, right? The Austin Jacksons, et cetera. You've got 3 or 4 quarterbacks that are probably going to be drafted in the first round. Then you've got a deep wide receiver class, many of which will probably a good chunk of them. Mims is in the first round conversation. You got Lamb, you got Judy, you got Ruggs. I mean, you've got a handful of wide receivers that are probably going to be taken in the first round. A couple of defensive back. All of a sudden, you're filling out the first round, and that's where a guy like this can. There's inevitably guys that we think are second or third round talents that a team really likes, maybe in the 20s, and they'll pounce on them. Seattle's been known to do that, and we all consider it a reach. But they have been known to take a guy in the first where you go, oh, really? So this happens all the time. And I mentioned last year the Ed Oliver thing. Nobody really thought he would get to 11. Even I was reaching with that, but he made it to 9. I mean, we thought that's a top 5 guy in the class, and he just kept dropping a little bit, and you wondered why. Teams get a little wacky in this, and we've mentioned it a couple times, this whole virtual draft situation. Who kind of knows what kind of wrenches that'll throw into the whole process? So I think he's a viable prospect. truth be told, I didn't know a ton about. I knew a little bit about him going into this process. I know a bit more, largely thanks to the guys at PFF. I recommend you watch one of their videos on him. I thought that was very informative. I watched some other highlight clips of him against Oklahoma that I found impressive, and other things I read and watched on him. But I came away very impressed with this kid, John. I came away thinking that this guy, there's not a lot of wrong answers the Bengals could supply us at number 33. But if this guy is available, he's got to be on the very, very, very short list of options.
Absolutely, and they'll have that list. They will have that list prepared. And I think it's also a testament, because I think a lot of people are wondering if they are thinking about trading back into the first round. And I don't think that Jones is the guy that you would mortgage, a third or fourth round pick or multiple picks to go back into the first. I think you're better off waiting to see who else falls. I think they just have more leverage staying at 33 and trading back, because that becomes a valuable spot for this exact scenario. There could be another team that really wants a guy like Josh Jones who fell out of the first round, because there just happens to be guys who just somehow end up there, and guys who thought were going to be in the first round end up in the second round. I think it's more valuable to stay put and not really trade up for any position that's not a quarterback, in my opinion. And because they only have 7 picks to start with, I think their only intention is to move back and get more to fill out the rest of the roster. So if Jones is there at 33, you're right. He's definitely one of those players that I'm sure Dave Lapham is going to mention right before the draft as a guy to watch for. But yeah, he just seems to be inexplicably not in the first round lock conversation, where guys like Isaiah Wilson are now in that conversation. And again, if it's a deep offensive tackle class, people can be subjective about how they really handle that in the first round. So if he's available, definitely watch out for him.
Yeah, I like that kid, and I am a fan of the Bengals staying put at 33 and kind of seeing what I like to see. That I would like to have seen them move up potentially for an impact player, but I think, like you said, at 33, that's a unique position to be in, and you can see a number of good players fall to them. I remember back in 2003, top pick in the second round, they got Eric Steinbach. He was a pretty damn good player. So, and he was deemed, they were kind of going, how did this guy fall to us, right? So, I mean, it happens. It happens. So I think that this kid could be in the short conversation if he's available at number 33. That is our two latest additions to the 2020 prospect watch list. 2 offensive linemen, Sadiq Charles from LSU and Josh Jones of Houston. So 2 very talented guys in their own right, and maybe guys that the Bengals will call upon in a couple of weeks. John, let's drop the mic and get out of here. What you got for us on our way out?
Wow, I literally have nothing to talk about.
Okay.
I don't know, man. It's another week of quarantine. It's another week of I really did think that they gave Drake Kirkpatrick like a week, his week of goodbye, whatever. I thought that this may be the first week that they do that with Andy Dalton, to give him like a whole week and a whole. But I guess that just this just happens to be the week that they've announced all their free agent acquisitions. They just did that today. They made all those official, even though they're not technically official because they haven't taken physicals or whatnot or anything like that. But I don't know, man. It's just this whole thing is weird, and I think that NFL GMs are being babies right now, because literally every business in the world is dealing with these same problems, and it's not like the draft is this complex. It's not this complex, man. You just start a conference and you say, hey, we want to pick this guy, and then boom. It's like they're so afraid of just their internet dropping out and then forfeiting the pick. Like they're going to have fail safes to do this. I just think they're just being really stupid, and they're trying to make this seem like, they're trying to find excuses to where that they would never have to go back to this again, and try to keep up with this perception that, the draft is a so important thing and they need all these things to work and whatever. I just think it's really dumb. And I think especially they're just not reading the room about what everybody else in the world has to deal with right now. That's just something that's kind of been on my mind, I guess.
To that point, I meant to get to this last week, and maybe even on one of our recent listener questions episodes. By the way, we'll do another one of those probably sometime next week, I would think, as we get closer to the draft. We'll probably take a break from it this week, but maybe next week. But so submit some to us. by the way.
Yes.
But we have a listener, Antonio Malone, who he emails us and hits us up on Twitter every once in a while. And he provided an interesting question where he kind of said, and I want to get your take on this too, John, but, do you think the Bengals and every NFL team, do you think their draft plans kind of alter if in the prospect of the season being delayed or canceled or, all that kind of stuff? Look, the president, I guess, had some sort of conversation with Roger Goodell at some point over the past week or so, kind of reassuring that it sounds like the football season will be played on schedule. Now, whether that means there's going to be people in attendance or, who knows. But it sounds like, for all intents and purposes, the schedule will be set as we sit here and it will be going forward. But I don't think it really changes anything because, I mean, your current state of the team is its current state, right? I mean, you gotta select the guy that you need now, even if it means you're not playing right away in September. That's kind of my take on it. I guess it's a very elementary take on it, but I still think you draft for right now and see what happens.
I don't know what more you can do than that. Like, the situation isn't entirely fluid. I don't think we need to be making any type of statements about what is for sure going to happen in 5 or 6 months from now. But yeah, like the only thing that they can do is just handle what's in front of them and just do this to the best of their ability, because that's all they can do. And no team has an advantage right now. Like, I guess the Bengals, maybe because they're not going to be scrambling with all this happening, because they're going to be picking at the top of round 2 to start Friday. They're going to be picking at the top of round 4 to start Saturday. So they're not going to have those maybe issues as well. But like, again, I think whatever happens, but just plan in the only way that you can. Like, I don't think that we should be planning for, any type of confirmed delay or any type of confirmed start of the season. I don't think either of those scenarios change what you do here, especially with Andy Dalton. I think there's just not a lot you can do in terms of, going away from what you were expecting to do, I guess.
Yeah, well said. And thanks to Antonio Malone or maybe it's Antoine Malone, submitting a question to us. Appreciate that. And just another quick little shout out to a guy named Spoon Dad. It's got 5 O's in it on Twitter. He was my 2000th follow, so I followed him back, and so congrats to him. I know I only got like half of what you got. You're way more popular than me. You're way better at the Twitter than I am, buddy. I know, but
your word's not mine.
Hey, I'll take the 2K. If for some reason you do not follow us, I'm at CJ Anthony CUI. John, where are you at?
John _Sheeran.
And of course, at Bengals OBI is the show Twitter handle, so you can follow.
Yeah, follow that page. That page should have a lot more followers than what it has right
now. Yeah. That one's at about 1,400 or so, 1,500. So go follow it. We keep you up to date on some stuff going on with the program and the podcast channel. And if for some reason you're a Bengals fan on Twitter and you don't follow Ben Baby, I don't know why you wouldn't. Go follow him. I mean, he's a
Ben _baby.
Yeah, at Ben _baby. Go follow him. Jeez Louise. If you, for some reason, it's not in your queue there, you got to do that. This has been an episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. As I mentioned, you can get this show on any number of audio platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, the Megaphone platform. We also have videos on our YouTube channel. Subscribe either to your audio channel or the YouTube channel. Get notified when we take the air and when new content is available, whether it's our show, whether it's Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk, Orange is the New Black, the podcast from Ace Boogie and Zim Houday, or Sorry If I Spit When I Speak from Daddy-O MacDuke. John Sheeran is on that show, and Dr. Hoji Smoji. Check out all the content that we have on the Bengals podcast channel, the SB Nation Bengals podcast channel, and keep it to Cincy Jungle for your news, opinions, analysis, breakdowns, draft galore. We'll have a ton of stuff there. We'll have a ton of stuff on the podcast channel, so keep it there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you next time. Johnny, thanks.
Thank you, man.